Morning everyone, welcome to the latest episode of On the Whistle, where we're going to be talking through Leeds United 2, Sunderland 1, and what in the end was obviously from a Black Cast perspective a really disappointing end to. At one point looked like it was going to be a brilliant away day at Ellen Road. We're going to have a little chat through the game, and as ever I'll get to your questions and comments and we'll have a good discussion around those. I won't talk too much about the game itself because, hopefully a lot of you will have seen my instant reaction video from the press box, which you can find on our channel if you haven't already seen it. But I think, to be fair, sort of having slept on it and thought about the game a bit more this morning, I don't think too much has sort of really changed from my view on it, in that I thought that the first half was a really strong performance from Sunderland. Yes, Leeds United dominated possession and they did have quite a lot of shots, but I think if you look at their shot map, there was only really one of them that was from close range, very much inside Sunderland's box. That was the header from Dan James that Luke O'Nien hooked clear. So I think that for all Leeds kind of controlled possession and got into dangerous areas at times, I think Sunderland were pretty comfortable with where the game was at defensively. I think they were in a position where, they always kind of had the wingers under control. They always seemed to be able to double up on them, didn't really give them any space in which to play. And I think Sunderland had a genuine threat. I think that was the thing. I know they didn't have many shots themselves, but I think you could argue through Isidor's goal, which was a brilliant bit of individual centre forward play, and Joe Bellingham's effort, and then the follow up from Roberts that Meslier saved early on. I thought Sunderland had the two best chances in the half. So I thought they got a really good balance about being really respectful about how good Leeds United are at home, but ensuring that they just didn't totally sit back. I've seen some really interesting stats that I think kind of sum up the challenge that Sunderland faced playing Leeds United at Ellen Road, and I think you've got to kind of respect just how good this Leeds team is at home. I noticed that when Sunderland got to the 10-minute mark, they became the first team in the league at Ellen Road this calendar year not to concede inside those opening 10 minutes. That tells you how strong Leeds have been. Some stats here courtesy of BBC Sport. Leeds at home in the Championship since September the 15th. They've won 13 of their 14 games. They've scored 39 goals and conceded 4. So I think that's the perspective from a Sunderland thing. Obviously, we want Sunderland to get to this level and judge them against this strength of opposition. But this was a really difficult task. I thought the first half was excellent. Second half, as I said on the video last night, I think that for all Leeds didn't create too many chances. And actually, Patterson didn't have a lot to do towards the end of the game. I did think that the momentum of the game shifted in that Leeds were still controlling possession. But I really did feel like Sunderland didn't have a foothold in the contest. They didn't really seem to have a way to get out, to get through the press. At times there was a little bit of individual quality to carry the ball away, win a set piece, buy some time that way. But invariably, Sunderland would just lose the ball and it would come straight back to them. For all that Leeds weren't creating many chances, I thought that they did have control of the game. And I thought because Sunderland just couldn't get out and they were just having to do so much defending and couldn't play through the Leeds press, you could see them visibly getting more and more tired as the half went on. And as I said last night, I think you've got to give a huge amount of credit to Daniel Farke, because I actually turned to my colleague Scott from the Northern Echo about 50 minutes into the game and said, you'd think for a team who have so much dominance at home and therefore are inevitably going to have so many set plays, so many free kicks and corners, you'd think their delivery and their sort of strategy would be so much better, because they wasted so many through 45, 50 minutes of the game. Daniel Farkas, you kind of sensed that. He explained afterwards that his decision to bring on Rothwell and Struijk, obviously a midfielder and a centre-half rather than naturally attacking players, was specifically because he felt Sunderland's structure in open play was so good defensively that they probably would need a bit of magic from a set piece. And I think you have to say, to be fair, Rothwell's delivery for the first goal is exceptional. I mean, he's really put it in a perfect area, the speed, the dip. It was an excellent set piece. I think the second one from a Sunderland perspective is much harder to take because they have opportunities to clear their lines. I thought it was quite a poor header from Samed, which enables Leeds to get the initial volley away. Of course, there's a little bit of luck because the volley's kind of shanked back out of Rothwell. But on his other foot, from the one that he delivered the corner, that's the free kick, for the first goal, it's a bit of quality from Rothwell. And maybe someone should do better in terms of cutting out that cross. It does seem to fly past Patterson. So I think the second goal was a really difficult one to take. So I think a little bit of a chase and experience in that second half for Sunderland. I think that they were outplayed by Leeds, who I think showed their class. I don't think it's kind of all negative from a Sunderland perspective, because I think that they can take a lot of heart from the first half performance in the way that they were able to get that blend between offering an attacking threat and defending really resolutely. And as I mentioned, even in the second half, even though I thought Leeds, they were certainly worthy of their equaliser, absolutely no doubt about that, and probably worthy of their winning goal as well. But as I say, from open play, they didn't really create too much. I thought Sunderland's back line was really strong. I thought Trey Hume had an excellent game. I thought Dennis Serkin had a good game. I thought Dan Ballard was excellent again. He's made a really strong return to the side. So I think there are positives for Sunderland to take away from this. And the big thing for me is that, yeah, for sure, last night was a really disappointing result. And it does make the top two look really, really difficult now. For me, I don't think when we get to the end of the season, if Sunderland are in the playoffs, which looks increasingly likely, my gut tells me we won't look at last night as, one of the big moments where they kind of lost out, if you like, in the push for the top two. I think we'll look more towards the games like the one at home to Plymouth, the one at home to Watford, as the opportunity, as the moments where they really, really let the sort of momentum they had slip. So I don't think it was a terrible performance by any means from Sunderland. I thought there was a lot of good in it. I think sometimes you have to hold your hand up and respect the opposition, and I certainly feel that was the story of the game last night. I think you have to give Leeds credit for the way they didn't panic after going behind, and the way they kept going, and a little bit of magic from Joe Rothwell, who I think deserves a lot of credit for that, because they were two really exceptional deliveries. So let's have a look at some of your questions. I'm going to put quite a few of them all in one to begin with, because it was kind of the main thing you were all talking about after the game, the main thing you were asking me about. So I'll put them all together and just talk you through my thoughts and feelings on them. So Tom Shiny says, cannot fault the commitment by the team. They gave it their all, but Leeds bench has quality. Again, I question Bris's choice of substitutions and reticence to introduce them. Brown surely over Samed and be more proactive than reactive. Our continued frailty over crosses and set pieces dreadful. Well, yeah, it's an interesting one, that, Tom, because actually Sunderland defended set pieces really, really well for the first hour. It was when Rothwell came on that it made a big difference. But yeah, we'll certainly get into the substitution stuff in a moment. Stu says tactics were spot on for the first 55 minutes, but they took complete control after that. Is it fair to say we took too long to make sub/tactical changes, and when we did, they made very little sense? Playing an out-and-out DM as the most advanced midfielder and taking off your centre forward is just baffling. Ian says, what did you make of the subs, Phil? Seeing a lot of criticism, but Mundell and Brown to me are at major risk in a high-intensity game for recurrence. Poveda was like for like. Samed worked at Berra, but not tonight. Mienda, right sub, maybe wrong person, but how did you see it? And Louis says, there'll be accusations at RLB of sitting back after another lead lost at the death. Surely it is more fair to say Leeds pushed us back by being better and more composed on the ball. Sunderland seemed to lose all composure and possession and had no outball after Eastdore's energy was spent. I agree. So my feeling from being at the ground yesterday, watching the game, obviously everyone will have their own opinions. I don't think Sunderland sat back in the second half, and I don't think the subs were made as defensive substitutions at all. I just don't think Sunderland on the night, for whatever reason, were good enough in possession. So I agree with Louis there that I think the story of the second half was more about the way that Leeds took control of the game, the quality they showed in possession, and particularly their pressing to prevent Sunderland getting out. I don't think it would be fair. I don't think Sunderland were being reactive in the second half. I think they were just pushed back by a team which, as I mentioned at the start, has an exceptional home record and a lot of good qualities at home. Now, in terms of the substitutions, I think the first thing I would say is that, one, there's a bit of a positive here in terms of the bench that Sunderland put out last night was the strongest they put out all season. At the moment, it doesn't quite feel like that because some of those players aren't match fit. So it's a little bit misleading when you look at the bench in terms of Mundell obviously hasn't played since November. Alan Brown's had 45 minutes with the under-21 since November. So it's not quite as strong as it looks at face value, but hopefully that's something that will improve in weeks going forward. I think the one thing I would say is that it's really, really harsh, I think, on Bris to compare Leeds' bench to Sunderland's bench last night. You know, Joe Rothwell won promotion to the Premier League last year. He's played in the Premier League. He's an incredibly experienced player with a lot of quality. Pascal Struijk has played in the Premier League. Ramazani was signed from the top tier in Spain for a huge sum of money last summer. Wilfred Nonto, I think, that's a player of that quality would pretty much walk into any other team in the Championship, and he's on the bench for Leeds last night. So I think right now, I think you've got to kind of respect that that's parachute payment and that's Premier League depth coming through. Now, in terms of the substitutions Bris made in the game itself, I sort of agreed with some of them and not with others. I had no problem with Mienda coming on for Isidore. I think, as Louis has mentioned there, I thought that was the right sub pretty much at the right time. I think Isidore got through a huge amount of running in the first hour of the game. I thought he looked really, really tired, and it didn't quite look like he had the energy that Sunderland needed over the top. Mienda's been excellent form in recent games. We've all spoken about how well he's done. I thought that was a fair sub at the right time. Poveda for Roberts, I think, was the right sub. I would have liked to see it maybe made a little bit earlier. I thought that Roberts showed fatigue from quite early on in the second half, and I thought that, to be fair, Poveda, I thought he had a bit of an impact. He carried the ball quite well. Junior Firpo, Daniel Farker actually brought him off in added time because he'd just taken a yellow card for sort of bringing down Poveda when Poveda burst past him. And I thought he showed something, so that's maybe on reflection a sub that could have been made earlier. The interesting one is obviously the Samed one. So Samed came on at the same time as Mienda did. He came on for Chris Regan, went into that more advanced role, which obviously looks a little bit odd because he's a defensive midfielder by trade. Listen, I think you have to be really honest and say that last night it really didn't work. I try to be consistent on these videos and not be too hypocritical, and I think I have to hold my hand up and say that after the Derby game when Samed did exactly the same thing, he came on and played as more of an attacking midfielder rather than a defensive midfielder. I praise that call because I thought it went really well. I think the idea certainly was in that game, and I imagine the logic was the same last night, is that basically in order to try and get Sunderland up the pitch, to try and prevent those waves of attack, you have to try and get more pressure on the ball, so you have to try and get up the pitch. And I think the logic is that your fresh legs with Samed should allow you to press Leeds better by playing him in a more advanced role where he can press, where he can hopefully nick the ball back, where he can try and actually apply some pressure and help his teammates get up the pitch. It really didn't work last night. It has worked in previous games, but I just didn't think it quite worked. I thought that it didn't really change the momentum of the game at all. And the problem then was in the moments where Sunderland did win the ball back, you then have your more defensive midfielder in possession on the counter-attack. And in those situations, I think you'd rather have a Dan Neil or a Joe Bellingham because I think as more attacking players, they obviously have a bit more of a passing range. So I think that's the one last night that definitely didn't work. And I think it's interesting going forward because I can understand why Brown and Mundle didn't come on last night. I think Ian's made some really good points there that yes, you have to get these players on the pitch. That's the only way they're going to build their match fitness. So it's a tricky balance. But putting them, especially Mundle with the severity of the hamstring injury that he's been out with, putting him in for a game of that intensity would have been quite a big risk. But I think that's going to be really important moving forward. And at the moment, for me, like from what we've seen this season, I think Brown probably, if it's going to be in a more attacking midfield role, I think Brown maybe with his championship experience might be a little bit of a better bet from what we've seen at the moment. But we'll have to see how that one moves forward. So I hope that's kind of made sense with my answer. I think that some of the subs were a little bit late. The Samed one definitely didn't work. But I do think that, there is a lot of times, I don't think it's a coincidence that Sunderland have dropped so many points later on in games, because I think it has been a pattern this season where the opposition have been able to make more subs much earlier in the half. Sometimes that's been down to Bris's preference, sometimes it's been down to a lack of options. I think last night you have to respect the ability that Leeds had and experience they had on their bench, and that did make a massive difference. And some of Sunderland's potentially key subs aren't fully match fit yet. It's going to be really interesting to see whether we do see a bit of a shift from Bris moving into the final weeks of the season. When Watson's back, when Mundle, Brown, players like that are a bit more match fit, will we see him be a bit more aggressive earlier in games? But I don't feel last night was about Sunderland being reactive. I think it was just a case of Leeds' quality showing, and for sure, Bris mentioned after the game that his substitutions didn't kind of alter the momentum, and that's definitely something that he'll have to reflect on. I think that midfield blend is going to be really interesting moving forward because it has kind of worked with Samed at times coming off the bench. That's when he's had his best performances. Wasn't what happened at Middlesbrough. He came on in that more defensive role and it pushed Dan Neil forward, and that worked well. So that would be an interesting one to see moving forward. So let's have a look at some of the other comments. Davey says, not the time for knee-jerk reactions to what was a hugely disappointing end to the game. Brown, Salis and Mundle returning with Watson and Dan's, hopefully not too far off, gives us great options going forward. Leeds are top for a reason. We won't have a side of their quality to face again. Keep the faith. Bill says, do you think like no one else in the Championship, Leeds were just too strong for us? Last night reminded me of what it felt like watching Prem games as a Sunderland fan. Certainly the second half, I think, I can only give my opinion from watching the games and the grounds. And if you look across the two games that Sunderland have played against Leeds this season, for me, they are the best team in the division. I think that, Sunderland took 3 points from the games against Sheffield United, and I think they were good value for that, and a bit unlucky to lose at home away at Bramall Lane, I think from Burnley, Sunderland took 4 points and were good value for that. Should have taken 6 if they'd taken the chances later on. And I know the table, it's still quite tight in terms of the top 3, but for me, Leeds are clear, from what I've seen, as the best team in the division in terms of the all-round control and dominance they exert over games. So I don't think it's, as I think, Davey, you're absolutely right, I don't think this is the night where Sunderland's kind of season unravelled or anything like that. I think they've just lost to a really, really good team. Showed some positives, definitely some negatives in the second half. So I don't think this will be the season-defining game, if you like. there is also obviously the reality of that we knew after the draws at home to Watford and Plymouth, and that raised the stakes for this game considerably. So I kind of have slightly mixed emotions. I don't think this is a game, as you said, Davey, to overreact to. At the same time, there's no getting away from the fact that it is a big blow for Sunderland's automatic promotion hopes. They're going to have to go on an exceptional run between now and the end of the season if they're going to challenge the top two. Fantastic achievement, of course, to be where they are, pretty safely kind of embedded in the playoffs. So yeah, cheers for those comments and questions. I thought this was So last couple of questions before I finish. Chris here says, how can Championship teams bridge the gap to the parachute clubs? Is it just going to take us longer than we all expect and wanted? I think it's a really good point. I think take nothing away from Leeds, an excellent team, an excellent performance. You can see last night and you can see over the course of the season that even though Sunderland have done brilliantly, there's a clear gap just in terms of squad depth and quality really and experience to the parachute clubs. And the answer is that it's getting harder and harder. And ultimately, I've been on a lot of sort of calls and press calls with the EFL chairman, Rick Parry, and there's a reason why they're lobbying for the way that the Premier League pays money to the EFL to change. And, they want a merit-based system, basically, where you get paid more in line with where you finish in the Championship rather than just a kind of upfront parachute payment and then solidarity payments to the rest of the clubs, because it will increase the competitive of the division. It's no longer the case that this is the most open division in the world. It might be beyond the top 4 or 5, but it's obvious for a long period of time the parachute clubs have a massive advantage. Very few teams have been able to bridge that gap, and the reality is they've done so by taking big risks. Ipswich got back-to-back promotions and did exceptionally well, but took big risks by the level of investment that they put in the squad over a period of time. And we've seen over the last decade that a lot of clubs who've done that, if they haven't they've taken that gamble and haven't won promotion, they've then really struggled and they've come into trouble with the financial rules. And in some cases, it's taken them years and years to recover from, and they still haven't. So I think it's really hard to criticise Sunderland for not going down that road. I think there's kind of two prongs to Sunderland's approach. One is to invest in their Category 1 academy and to try and build up that talent over time to get to the level of these players. And I think we're starting to see the fruits of that. And the other is that the occasional player sale will allow them gradually to increase their budget and invest in a better quality of player. It's interesting, Chris, that Sunderland's kind of strategy is that, not saying it's like binding or anything, but they're hoping to have reached the Premier League by the end of next season. And I wonder if the Enzo Lefebvre deal in January is just a little bit of a sign that those player sales that we've seen in recent times, Ross Stewart, Jack Clark, it's just allowing them to increase that budget a little bit. Maybe if Sunderland, and hopefully the Wales go up because they've got absolutely every chance, let's make no mistake, they've got nothing to fear if they do end up in the playoffs. Hopefully maybe the odd player sale will allow them again just to lift that level of player that they're signing. So I think the future is really positive for Sunderland. I think they're doing it the right way and I think they can do it, but it will take time. And I think even if you look at a club like Brighton and Brentford, who are probably the model that Sunderland are closest to trying to emulate, it took them a lot of years to get out of the Championship, and the reality is it might be difficult again next year. But I do feel like, generally speaking, we're seeing Sunderland make progress. They're heading in the right direction, and I think the way they've played against the parachute payment teams this season, albeit last night was really disappointing, can give us a lot of positivity going forward. So I am quietly confident that Sunderland are doing it the right way and they're putting the building blocks in place. But for sure, I think we saw last night that there was a